Wildfires and heat waves in southern Europe, floods in China, storms in Minnesota. Why is this happening and why it will only get worse in the short term? Well, this is pretty basic stuff when it comes to physics and chemistry. This happens because of climate change. These events are not isolated. They might happen regardless of climate change, but climate change is a damage amplifier. It amplifies the likelihood of such an event to occur and the damage of it. If such an event would occur once every 100 years, now it happens once every 10 years. If that event was going to an extreme of up to 130%, now it's going up to 200%. That's why climate change is so dangerous. And to be honest, this is very sad news. I hope that the people in those communities can recover properly. But the reality is this will be only getting worse. And this is very sad. In the short term, even in the medium run. And then we'll have two pathways. The one which is devastating, catastrophic, which impacts are irreversible. And the other one is when emissions peak and slow down and we reverse the pathway and the world becomes a very prosperous place. Both pathways are still possible. Let me explain you why. First of all, the events that are happening and will keep happening and will be getting worse, these are due to climate change related impact, specifically global warming. With global warming in the whole world, for example with wildfires, it's pretty basic stuff. If that zone becomes drier and warmer, it's more prone to have such devastating impacts. And once there's a wildfire in that place or that community or that region, it makes it more likely to become drier, as trees won't be able to recover as fast as they should. Whereas the CO2 related emissions that went to the atmosphere due to that tree that was burned, that is adding up in the atmosphere and it's becoming warmer. That's on one hand. On the other one, when it comes to flooding and storms, the global warming, of course, that includes the oceans and the seas. And of course, if the oceans get warmer, there's more evaporation and moisture is being accumulated in the atmosphere in ways that was not previously done. Which again does not mean that we're going to have a storm 100%. No, it increases the likelihood and the severity of the impact. Therefore, more extreme floods are likely to occur. And that's not the only reason, because floods can occur either in places where there's a heavy storm and there's no river there. But if there was a river, then we have another problem, because as sea level rises, as due to climate change, same does that specific river or rivers in general in the world. And this is something that is not usually understood, but it's both impacts. And since you have that river that is slightly more like bigger and higher than it was previously, it will be easier to that the flood becomes more damaging in that concrete region. So it's both damage amplifiers when it comes to flooding. And this is an issue because this will be happening in the coming decades. In the best case scenario, only in the coming 1 or 2 decades will be getting slightly worse. And when I mean to slightly worse is because we won't be able to fully transition to a fully decarbonized economy. In a couple of years, it's impossible. We need to electrify all kinds of energy, from transport to industry and so on. Obviously, the electricity we get at home or in industries too. And that doesn't happen overnight. Of course, you need to transition to renewables and nuclear energy, but it's impossible to do in 1 or 2 years. We'll be keeping burning fossil fuels that will go to the atmosphere and will make it hotter and warmer and will produce more climate change related impacts. That's why it's impossible to get better. Actually, it will get worse. And it's not only about the electrification of everything, but also we're talking about hard to abate sectors such as cement, steel, also agriculture, which is around 15% of CO2 related emissions. Also other industries such as the aviation or many others that are extremely hard to decarbonize and will be burning fossil fuels in the process towards decarbonization. That's why that even in the best pathway, that in the end, by 2050, 2060, whenever, I hope it's 2050, but it's virtually impossible. In that pathway, still it will be warmer than today. That's why we need to assume that this is only getting slightly worse in the coming decades. But then there's the second pathway, which is the one that nobody likes because it's a catastrophe. It's that we don't do this transition as quickly as possible and as profoundly as possible, and then we end up being in a scenario of 2.7, 3, 3.2, 3.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. A pathway that is currently a possibility. It was much worse before, much worse, but still it's pretty catastrophic because this means that the Earth warms itself higher and faster than you might predict. It's an irreversible effect, and there are many tipping points that we won't cover in this video. But this pathway is a very catastrophic one, and we're on our way to this second pathway, completely 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and that cannot happen. That's why we need to transition as fast as possible to make sure we're in the first pathway and not the second one. But we're talking about pathways, and pathways mean possibilities. So the future is not done yet, right? We, as humanity, can decide which pathway to move on. The future is not set. Our destiny is not a catastrophic one. It can be a very green and resilient future. Prosperity for everyone. That could be the first pathway. But still, we need to adapt, because from today until we reach not only the peak of emissions, but especially a fully decarbonized economy, it will get warmer. And if it gets warmer, we need to adapt. So adaptation is critical so that these events that are occurring and will keep occurring don't do as much damage as they would if we weren't adapted. That's why adaptation is critical in the short to medium run. And mitigation, which means reducing CO2 related emissions, is critical as well. In the short, medium, and long run, even after 2050, 2070, as will be have cumulative emissions from these 200 last years, and we need to subtract them and sequester them from the atmosphere. And this is the way. We're optimistic about it. It might be very difficult, and it will be, because climate change is not the only issue we're facing as humanity. But we can do this. We're completely sure about this, because still the ball is on our side. It doesn't depend on a miracle. It's still in our hands. So if you like this content, do not hesitate to subscribe to the channel. And as always, try to enjoy your life as best as you can, embrace your curiosity, and if possible, be the change you want to see in the world. See you in the next optimistic adventure.